Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Gallagher, and today we're going to discuss multiplying and dividing integers. So our first rule for multiplying integers is when you multiply two integers with the same signs, the result is always positive. So when you multiply two integers with the same signs, the result is always positive. Well, what does that mean? It means a positive times a positive equals a positive. So a positive times a positive equals a positive, and it also means that a negative times a negative equals a positive. So a negative times a negative equals a positive. Those are your two rules. Same signs, when you multiply, it's always a positive. So let's look at example 1. We have negative 8 times negative 10. So in example 1, we have a negative times a negative, and a negative times a negative gives us a positive, and then 8 times 10 gives us 80. So your answer is positive 80. Let's look at example 2. We have a negative 5 times a negative 7. Again, a negative times a negative gives us a positive, and then 5 times 7 equals 35. And that is your answer. Example 3. Well, in example 3, you have 5 times 6. Both are positive numbers, so 5 times 6 gives us a positive 30. And then in example 4, 7 times 9, again, both positive numbers, and 7 times 9 gives us 63. Okay, so now let's look at our second multiplying rule with integers. So our second multiplying rule with integers is when you multiply two integers with different signs, the result is always negative. So when you multiply two integers with different signs, the result or answer is always negative. So what does that mean? Well, that means a positive times a negative equals a negative. So a positive times a negative is a negative, and a negative times a positive is a negative. So a positive times a negative equals a negative, and a negative times a positive equals a negative. So different sign, your answer is going to always be a negative when you multiply integers. So let's look at example 1. We have negative 11 times 3. So here we have a negative and you have a positive. So a negative times a positive gives us a negative, and 11 times 3 is 33. So negative 33 is your answer. Let's look at example 2. We have a positive 3 and a negative 10. So a positive times a negative gives us a negative, and 3 times 10 is 30. So your answer is negative 30. Let's look at example 3. 12 times negative 6. We have a positive 12 and a negative 6. So a positive times a negative equals a negative, and 12 times 6 is 72. So your answer is a negative 72. And lastly, example 4, we have a negative 4 times a negative 8. We have a negative times a positive, so a negative times a positive is a negative, and 4 times 8 equals 32. So your answer is negative 32. So what I would like you to do is a you try section on your own. Please do numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we will discuss it in class. Now let's discuss the dividing rules for integers. So our dividing rule number 1, when we're dealing with integers, is when you divide two integers with the same signs, the result is always positive. So when you divide with the same signs, the result is always positive. You're basically following the same rules as multiplying integers. So for example, a positive divided by a positive equals a positive. So a positive divided by a positive equals a positive. Also, a negative divided by a negative equals a positive. So a negative divided by a negative equals a positive. Let's look at example 1. Negative 80 divided by negative 10. We have a negative divided by a negative, which gives us a positive, and 80 divided by 10 equals 8. So our answer is positive 8. Example 2. Negative 72 divided by negative 8. Again, we have a negative divided by a negative, which gives us a positive, and 72 divided by 8 gives us 9. So our answer is positive 9. Example 3, 30 divided by 5. Both are positive numbers, so a positive divided by a positive gives us a positive, and 30 divided by 5 gives us 6. So our answer is positive 6. Example 4, negative 45 divided by negative 9. We have a negative divided by a negative, which gives us a positive, and 45 divided by 9 gives us 5. So our answer is positive 5. Let's look at our second dividing integer rule. So our next dividing rule when discussing integers is when you divide two integers with different signs, the result is always negative. So when you're dividing by different signs, your answer is always negative. Again, we're following the same rule as multiplying. So what does that mean? When we have a positive and we divide it by a negative, it equals a negative. So a positive divided by a negative equals a negative. Also, a negative divided by a positive equals a negative. So a negative divided by a positive equals a negative. So when you divide two different signs with integers, your answer is always going to be a negative. Let's look at example 1. 30 divided by negative 6. So we have a positive 30 divided by a negative 6. Therefore, your answer is going to be negative, and then 30 divided by 6 is 5. So your answer is negative 5. Example 2. We have a positive 72 divided by a negative 8. A positive divided by a negative gives us a negative, and 72 divided by 8 is 9. So our answer is negative 9. Let's look at example 3. We have a positive 45 divided by a negative 5. A positive divided by a negative gives us a negative, and 45 divided by 5 gives us 9. So our answer is negative 9. And our last example, example 4, we now have a negative 45 divided by a positive 9. Again, a negative divided by a positive gives us a negative, and 45 divided by 9 gives us 5. So our answer is negative 5. So what I would like you to do now on your own is the you try section. Please complete numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we will discuss it in class. Thank you.